This is the Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond podcast. History with a twist. And now your host, Rebecca Larson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I am Rebecca Larson and I'm very pleased to welcome back yet again, Mr. Matt Lewis. Welcome.
Oh, not him again. After last time, I'm surprised you invite me back, but thank you very much for having me again.
I feel like, why have you not been knighted yet? I feel like I'm going to call you Sir Matt Lewis.
Okay, you can do that. I will take that. You know what? One of my all-time dreams is to be one day become a Knight of the Garter. I think that would be the coolest group to ever be part of. I have zero chance of it happening. I have never done anything worthwhile enough for that to happen. But you know, every Christmas, I'm waiting for the letter.
You ask Santa every Christmas, don't you?
And every Christmas he says, "Shut up."
Not again. How many times do I have to tell you, you don't qualify?
Exactly.
Oh, gosh. Well, I always enjoy having you on, and I wanted to have you back again to help fill in on Thursdays. And today we're talking about another one of your specialties. Obviously, you've written several books, and this one is one of the topics that I am just so fascinated by, and it's Matilda. And I think you guys know how much I like Matilda. And Matt, you did a special event for me on Empress Matilda as well. So I know my listeners enjoy her too. I feel like every time you're on now, I'm going to swear, but I feel like Empress Matilda was just a badass woman from history who doesn't get enough credit. I feel like she and Ethelfled were really like the two first queens, don't you think?
Absolutely. I'm going to take it as a challenge to make you swear every time I'm on now. If we get to the end of an episode and you haven't sworn, I'm going to consider myself a failure. And I want to see if I can make it progressively bad swear words as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, Ethelfled gets a bit more recognition than Empress Matilda does, even if you know anything about Anglo-Saxon queens. You know, she ruled the kingdom of Mercia as Lady of the Mercians for a fair while. She was instrumental in helping her brother Edward the Elder to fight back the Vikings after their dad Alfred the Great had kind of started that Anglo-Saxon resistance, if you like. So I think Ethelfled is sometimes, you know, given a bit more recognition than Matilda is, who everybody knows Empress Matilda and everybody loves Empress Matilda. I rarely meet anyone who says, "Ugh, I can't stand Empress Matilda." Stephen is a different matter.
Yes.
And I will fight. I like Stephen. I actually quite like Stephen. I think Stephen suffers because people like Empress Matilda and therefore they feel they have to hate Stephen. But she is, you know, a fascinating woman, utterly indomitable. I mean, she's the mother-in-law of Eleanor of Aquitaine, for crying out loud. You know, who could possibly live up to that position apart from Empress Matilda? What a pair they were. I'm not sure Henry II ever really stood a chance of getting a word in edgewise or having his own opinion on anything.
Yeah, that's just the thing about her. She is like, to me, she's the mother of the Plantagenets. And I don't even know if that's historically accurate to say, but that's who she is to me. Is that historically accurate?
It is, yeah. I mean, her son Henry II is considered to be the first Plantagenet king. You know, they might well have described themselves as Angevins. Plantagenet is a name that comes much later. But she is absolutely the matriarch of that family. She's his mother when he becomes king. She has been fighting for almost 2 decades to maintain initially her claim to the English throne. But when it becomes clear that she can't make that stick, she continues the fight, in essence, to maintain Henry's claim, to kind of keep those embers burning so that Henry has something to claim. So, you know, when people talk about Henry VII would never have become king without Margaret Beaufort, this is the medieval Margaret Beaufort. Yeah. There is no way Henry II would have become, in my opinion, the best king England ever had if Empress Matilda hadn't been there and hadn't fought his corner and hadn't protected everything that he eventually ended up having.
Well, let's go back to the beginning and kind of discover how she became who we know her as today. What did her upbringing look like? I kind of want to do like her upbringing up until like maybe the White Ship, because I'm also fascinated by the White Ship tragedy.
Yeah. So Matilda is born in 1102. She is the oldest legitimate child of Henry I of England. So Henry kind of famously had about 24 illegitimate children. The most ever recorded by an English or British monarch. He even beats Charles II and people like that. You know, absolute amateur compared to Henry I. But he only has one legitimate daughter and one legitimate son, and that's important because only legitimate children can succeed to the crown, to the throne of England. Illegitimate children are absolutely great and fine, and Henry recognises lots of them, gives them noble titles, takes very good care of them, but they are considered barred from the accession. Only legitimate children can succeed a king. So however many eggs he has in his basket, about 25 or 26 eggs in his basket, only 2 of those are dynastically critical to him. Matilda is the oldest, and her brother is obviously going to be the next king of England. So her little brother William Adelin. Adelin is a Normanised version of the Anglo-Saxon Etheling, so the idea that you are throne worthy, that you're what we would call a prince, that you're in line for the succession. So he's called William Adelin. He's going to be the next king of England. Fingers crossed for Henry, anyway. And so what Matilda represents is, in the same way that most young girls, daughters of monarchs, represent a significant bargaining chip on the marriage market. She has the potential to create an alliance for Henry, and Henry is keen to position himself as, you know, one of the most important monarchs in Europe. You know, he's stolen the throne from his brother.
That's another great story.
Yeah, you know, lots of suspicion that he's behind the death of his one brother. He imprisons his other brother for 28 years. He keeps his brother as a prisoner. So Henry's considered a very good medieval king, but very not a nice man. Not a nice man. I wouldn't like to get on the wrong side of him. So he wants to increase the prestige of this crown that he's, you know, sort of stolen. And part of how he might do that is how he might marry his only legitimate daughter. But in fact, it's not Henry that approaches a husband for Matilda. It's a husband who comes asking for Matilda's hand in marriage, which kind of makes Henry feel pretty great about himself. Yeah. Because that husband is the Holy Roman Emperor, you know, the most significant monarch on the continent at this time. He's Henry V. He is a fair bit older than Matilda. So this all kicks off in about 1109. So Matilda is kind of 7 years old. Henry V is a grown man by this point. I think he's about 20. But he recognises that this could be a really prestigious and valuable marriage for him. And Henry, I imagine Henry sitting on the throne, desperately trying to play it cool, as the Holy Roman Emperor's ambassadors say, you know, the emperor would like to marry your daughter. And Henry's going, oh, let me think about it. Yes. So huge moment for Henry. And a couple of years later, when she is, about 9 years old, Matilda is kind of packed off. She heads to the English southern coast, crosses the Channel, is handed over to the representatives of the Holy Roman Emperor, and heads off into Germany. And that might well have been where she'd spent the rest of her life if everything had gone according to plan. So what we see happening in Germany is Henry V seems like a pretty good guy. You know, he is absolutely aware he's marrying a child. They don't get officially married straight away. She doesn't live with him straight away, you know, and they're definitely not sharing a bed early in their relationship. But what Henry does do is construct this education for Matilda to prepare her to be his empress. He wants a wife who can sit beside him and help him. You know, he's managing sprawling territories across modern day Germany into the east of what's currently France, down into Italy, and he wants to expand all of this as well. So he needs a wife who is going to help him, who is going to be a companion. And it seems like he wants someone who is his equal, who he can talk to and have meaningful conversations with. So he constructs this education for Eleanor. She is taught several different languages. She is exposed to the politics of the empire quite early. And obviously Henry is preparing her for this long life in front of her as an empress in the Holy Roman Empire. when they're a little bit older, I think when Matilda's about 16, Henry is left a piece of land in Italy. So this countess in Italy passes away. She's got no heirs. She decides to kind of irritate everybody in Italy and the Pope and everybody else and leave this land to the Holy Roman Emperor, who they don't really want to have it. So Henry, travels south, crosses over the Alps with Matilda along with him, puts on this big display of giving away loads and loads of money when they get there. And he spends a bit of time in Italy, manages to... there's a really awkward thing about Henry. So Henry had been crowned. Part of the thing about being Holy Roman Emperor is you don't qualify for that title until you're crowned by the Pope. So you can be King of the Germans and you can rule what is the Holy Roman Empire, but you're not supposed to call yourself the Holy Roman Emperor until you're crowned by the Pope. So Henry, like a lot of other Holy Roman Emperors, has a pretty fractious relationship with the papacy. He has managed, in a good moment, he has managed to get himself crowned Holy Roman Emperor. But he wants to go and wear his crown in Italy for Easter, and he wants to get Matilda crowned as the Holy Roman Empress too. And so the Pope says he won't do this because he's not in a very good mood with Henry at the moment. So Henry decides to kidnap the Pope, because why not?
Oh, yeah.
What else are you going to do?
Good choice.
And he sort of forces him to crown Matilda. And as soon as they leave Rome, the Pope is like, I did that under duress, it doesn't count. So there really is this whole thing about whether Matilda is actually entitled to call herself an empress, because the Pope would say she absolutely cannot. But she will spend the rest of her life calling herself empress.
Interesting.
And heaven protect you if you try to call her anything else. This is a woman who will guard that title for the rest of her days. But there is some technical doubt about whether she's able to call herself a princess. An empress, sorry. But then when Henry needs to go back over the Alps into Germany, because you can't leave the Holy Roman Empire alone for very long. People will launch rebellions and have great fun while you're not there. Henry needs to go back, but he also needs to make sure that these lands in Italy are being cared for properly and settled and bedded into his empire. And so he leaves Matilda behind in Italy to rule these lands for him at the age of about 16. He clearly trusts her and understands that she is able to do these things, that she is already competent, and he's willing to trust her and give her the experience of doing this. So at 16, she is ruling a significant, not a massive territory, significant territory in Italy on her husband's behalf, with his soldiers around her. But she is responsible for taking care of that. And as far as we know, nothing goes wrong. She ends up back in Germany with Henry when all of the work there is done. Seems like she's done a pretty good job. And Henry must have thought, excellent. This is exactly what I've provided an education for my wife to be able to do. We are going to be an unstoppable power couple.
Love it. I love that. I was just thinking about that as you were saying. I'm like, he basically was having her educated for roughly 7 years. And there she is, just running things on her own already at 16. That's amazing. She really, she didn't get to spend much time in England. If you really think about it, the beginning of her life, it was so brief.
No, she would have been the first 9 years, maybe. How much of that would she remember? She would have spent time with her mother in her mother's household, and doubtless at 9 years old, it would be a fairly significant wrench to leave your family behind at 9 years old. But how much of that she remembers by a few years later when she's, becoming embedded into the Holy Roman Empire and the life of a German queen and all of the things that are expected of her there. England may well have been, a distant memory. My mum and dad are there, but how much about them do I remember? Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, is her future.
Yes, exactly. And I guess I never really realized how much he respected her, or like you said, wanted her to be a good partner for him. And
I think he educates her in the hope that she will be what he needs her to be. And it's clear that when he gives her these opportunities, maybe they're tests, I don't know, but she passes with flying colours, and he is, you can imagine him absolutely delighted that he's going to have the help that he needs to run this sprawling and pretty fractious empire.
Is there any way to know if she enjoyed her time there?
It's really tricky, because when what happens later happens, she doesn't seem to stay. She leaves Germany quite quickly.
Yeah.
But she is loved there. People want her to stay. People are asking her to stay and trying to find a position for her, because she is clearly respected and liked by the people there, it seems to be her that makes the decision that she doesn't want to spend the rest of her time there.
Okay, well, I guess now we have to get up to the reason why she leaves. This is the part I love.
Well, we're going to cross over. We're going to have to cross over the White Ship a little bit for the reason that she actually leaves, because her husband dies in 1125, fairly unexpectedly at a young age. So she's now 23-year-old widow. There is an election, so she is given the royal seal to care for, and the point is that she will pass this on to the next emperor. The Holy Roman Empire has this idea of a kind of elected element to the kingship, so they have all these electors who get together and decide who's going to be the next monarch. It's not necessarily the son of the old monarch, and she doesn't actually have a son with Henry either, so there isn't a son of Henry's to succeed him. And she seems to very quickly hand that royal seal over to a member of the clergy, an archbishop, and sort of says, I don't want it. I don't want to be involved in the decision about who comes next. And that might have been partly because if it's not your candidate that comes up next, you've alienated the new emperor and you've kind of nailed your colours to the mast and you're done. But she kind of steps aside from being any involvement in who's going to be Henry's successor and sort of makes a fairly sharp exit out of Germany at that point. But there is a good reason to go home. Which is what you want to talk about.
Yes, please. That I definitely want to get into that. I feel like so many years ago, I think it was like 2020 when I did my tutor course during lockdown. And that was one of the things that I think that you provided for the course was the White Ship tragedy. And there is just something so heart-wrenching about that story. But her coming out of it, right, like sets the tone for the future. And I guess I don't want to say too much. And I'm sure people know the story, but for those that don't know the story, maybe you can go into it.
Oh, okay. So Henry I is in Normandy. So he's ruling England and Normandy, has this cross-channel empire. So he's spent a bit of time on either side of it. And he is returning back to England during the winter from a period in Normandy, preparing at Barfleur. He has his son, William Adelin, who we mentioned, his son and heir with him. Lots of the nobility of the court and lots of their children, their adult late teen children are there too. So the whole royal court is in Normandy and they're looking to go back over to England. And a ship's captain comes to Henry I and he says, my dad had the honour of sailing your dad, William the Conqueror, across the Channel in 1066 when he went over to fight the Battle of Hastings. And he says, I've just had this brand new ship refitted. It's called the White Ship, Le Neuf Blanc. And it's the most beautiful ship, the fastest ship you've ever seen. And he says, I'd be absolutely honoured if I could christen this ship by carrying you across the English Channel back to England in the same way that my father did for your father. And Henry's a grumpy old man. He's clearly not impressed by fast cars, fast ships, whatever. And he's a bit like, do you know what? I've already made my preparations. My packing's done. I'm not moving my stuff. I can't be bothered. But if you want to, you can go and speak to my son William and you can see if you can take him and his mates back across. And I always think, did Henry ever think that this would be the modern equivalent of giving your kids the keys to a Ferrari and saying, off you go and have some fun? The ship's captain goes to William Adelin and all of his mates and says, got this splendid fast ship. It's absolutely stunning. There's no one faster on the ocean. Your dad says I can take you back across if you want me to. And obviously all these young lads are like, absolutely, we're having it. Get the beers in, road trip, sea trip. And they do exactly that. And I mean, the main thing they do is get the beers in. They fill the White Ship with barrels of wine and they all start drinking and getting rowdy. Henry I's ship sets off, like the old man's ship, plodding along out into the sea. And they're still loading the White Ship. They're getting ready, getting more and more drunk. Lots of the sources talk about William and his friends encouraging the crew to drink as well. Seems like a great idea, doesn't it? A bit of drink driving. And so that by the time they're ready to leave, the ship is full. It's full of rowdy young men and women who are drunk. It has a crew that is drunk. There's talk of some of the young noblemen kind of pushing the oarsmen off and laughing and joking that they're going to row the ship. They're never going to do that. They're too posh for that. Break a nail. And we get one account that tells us a couple of people decide to get off the ship. One of those people is William's cousin, Stephen of Blois. Spoiler. It's important. So some of the sources say that Stephen had a bit of an upset stomach and wasn't feeling very well, so he got off the ship because he was ill. There are other sources that maybe, or he didn't have his sea legs with him, like Mr. Potato Head, he forgot to pack his sea legs. There are some sources that talk about several people getting off the ship because they thought this is getting out of hand and this is a really bad idea, which is also entirely believable.
Yeah.
So a few people get off the ship as it's preparing to push out from Barfleur Harbour. And because they're all drunk, because Henry I's ship has already gone early, and because this guy has said this is the fastest ship you'll find, they're all like, that's it, we're going to race Henry home. We're going to beat the king back to England. And you can imagine the rowdy shouting and the drunken young men. It's not hard to imagine, is it, even in 2026? Because some things don't change. And they're moving out of Barfleur Harbour, and quite possibly because the crew are also drunk, they strike a rock before they even make it out of Barfleur Harbour. And this is a rock that everybody knew was there. It's still there today. It's a well-known obstacle. This ship and the sailors on board must have gone in and out of that harbour so many times. They all knew it was there. I think the only explanation for why they hit it is because they're all so drunk and out of control.
Yeah.
So the rock tears the side of the white ship off and it begins to sink really, really quickly. Now, the issue is that in the medieval period, nobody could swim. Swimming was not a thing. It was not a sport that people undertook. Unless you were working in the sea and your job required you to be able to swim, ordinary people didn't swim, and noble people certainly didn't swim. Absolutely not something they would do. So they're beginning to sink into the freezing cold, wintry water of Barfleur Harbour, and none of them can swim. They're all wearing the finest silks that money can buy, which are flimsy as anything and offer no protection against the cold water. And so they can't swim. Their clothes are taken on water. They're being dragged down. They're so thin they're getting freezing cold almost immediately. We get sources that talk about a few people making it on board a small lifeboat, and that as they're being rowed away, and the one source says that William Adelin, the prince, is on this lifeboat as well. And as it's being rowed away, he hears one of his half sisters. So there are several of his half brothers and sisters on the white ship with him, Henry I's illegitimate children. He hears one of his half sisters crying for help, and he orders the boat to turn around. And the people are, they've obviously watched the Titanic movie. They're like, we're not going back because we'll get swamped by all of those people in the water.
Yeah.
But William Adelin is like, I am absolutely not leaving my sister out there to drown. We are going back. They go back, and lo and behold, in true Titanic fashion, the ship is swamped by people trying to climb on board and broken up, and they all end up back in the water. How true some of this is, we don't know, because there's nobody there who saw it, really.
Yeah, so, I guess that's a good point.
Yeah, these are the reports that we get later, but how much of it is true, how much they're trying to paint William Adelin as a chivalric figure who went back to save his sister becomes really, really hard to get at. But let's not let that ruin a good story. We're told that there are a few people who kind of bob to the surface. One of them is a butcher from Rouen named Barrow, he was travelling over to England to chase some debts that he's owed by the English court, and presumably at this point is thinking this was not worth the money. But he's wearing, the cheapest of the cheap clothes that you can possibly get, like a sheepskin fleece and everything like that. So that's keeping him warm, and it's actually helping him to float. So he's bobbing around in the water in the night wondering, how on earth am I going to get out of this? And some of the stories must have come from him because this is the only man that survives. But we're told at one point the ship's captain also manages to get back up to the surface and kind of clamber onto a piece of wood, and then Rose from the Titanic kicks him off because it's not big enough for both of them. She does not. He's clinging onto a piece of wood, and he says to Barrow the butcher, "Where's the prince? Where's William Adelin?" And the butcher says he went under, he's drowned, and he's not come back. And at this point, we're told that the ship's captain, realising that if he ever made it back to land alive, he was going to get killed by the king, just slipped back under the water and allowed himself to drown. So Barrow the butcher is the only person who was recorded as surviving the White Ship disaster. There were probably several hundred people on that ship who drowned that night, and amongst them, I'm not saying they're more important than anybody else, please don't think I am, but were the sons and daughters of some of the really big noble families in England. So this is a generation of the ruling class being wiped out, in one dark night because of a stupid drunken accident. We're told that Henry gets back to England. News eventually catches up with them that the White Ship has sunk, and all of the nobility at court who have lost their own children on the White Ship are kind of stifling their emotions because they're utterly terrified of telling Henry that his only legitimate son and heir has died. No one wants to be the one to tell the king because Henry's got a foul temper at the best of times.
Yeah.
And so what all of these brave and noble chivalric figures do is they grab this little 8-year-old boy and they tell him to go and tell the king that his son's dead. I mean, wow. Way to go, guys.
They're like
real grown-up response.
Pushing him in front of them.
Yeah. They push this little kid in front of the king, and this little kid has to be like, excuse me, Mr. King, sir, I'm afraid your son drowned last night. And Henry is absolutely distraught. Henry does seem like a genuinely loving father. He took good care of all of his children and really cared. So the thing for monarchs in a situation like this is that they're facing this kind of two-pronged issue. They have the intense personal loss of losing a child. Henry, we're told he locks himself away for 3 days and refuses to see anybody, and there's concern that he's not had any food delivered to his room, that he might have just died in his room in shock and grief. He's having to deal with all of that personal grief alongside the fact that he now has a massive dynastic crisis too, because William Adelin was his only legitimate son, the only male who could succeed him. Henry, when he begins to deal with the dynastic problem alongside the personal grief, is presented with a few options. He could try and get one of his illegitimate children recognised as his lawful heir, but probably no one is going to go for that because illegitimate children shouldn't be allowed to inherit the crown. He does have other nephews around. So his older brother Robert, who he's currently got in prison at this point, does have a son. He could allow his nephew to succeed him, but Henry seems utterly committed to the idea that he wants his blood to remain on the throne, his children, not his nephew, not anybody else. We know that Stephen of Blois, the guy who got off the White Ship, is considered to be Henry's favourite nephew. Stephen is showered with lands and titles in England and on the continent by Henry, and really well taken care of. He could have said, "I'll make Stephen my heir," but he doesn't do that either. What he does instead is cause all of the nobles in England to swear to recognise his daughter Matilda as his heir when he dies. Now, I think what Henry is hoping at this point is that Matilda will have a son. So it's 1120, so this is 5 years before Henry V has died. By this point, Matilda is 18 years old. I think Henry is imagining that Matilda will have a son and that he will get his grandson to succeed him on the throne of England. I don't think he ever really envisaged Matilda succeeding him as queen. And so he does cause all of the nobility to swear to recognise her when he's gone. He extracts this oath from them a couple of times, and obviously then he's faced with another significant crisis when Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, dies, and Matilda is left as a widow at the age of 23 with no children.
Yeah.
Because potentially this is all of Henry's plans going out of the window yet again.
Right. He's like, oh shit, what do I do now?
Exactly. I got my swear word, yeah. So Henry is trying to work out what to do. And we don't know to what extent Matilda's decision to come back from Germany is down to her dad saying, "I need you back here." There is a significant political role for you here, which she is not now going to have in the empire. She could be a respected former empress, but she's not going to have any children. She's not going to rule anywhere. And Henry may well have said to her, if you come back, I've got a position for you. So she ends up coming back to England. And Henry comes up with an answer. So in 1128, a few years after Henry V has died, and mainly because he's becoming increasingly concerned about his brother Robert's son sort of snatching the throne and making a play for the crown when he's gone, he realises that he needs to get Matilda married again and hopefully get her to have a son. A weird thing for a dad to be trying to convince his daughters to do, but come on,
get at it.
Exactly. Yeah. My dad always used to tell a story that my granddad had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and they were all well into their 30s and didn't have any children. And they came round for a meal one time with, my mum brought my dad and my uncles brought their partners round at the time, their girlfriends. And my granddad offered, this would have been in the early 70s. So he offered 500 quid, which is a lot of money, lot of money, to the first person to give him a grandchild. And my nan apparently had an absolute fit at him that, the kids will be at it on the dining room table if you don't pack it in. So, but I don't, not things to think about. I apologise. Right. But I think Henry is probably kind of in the same boat. He needs to get Matilda married and he wants to get a son from her to succeed him as his grandson. So Henry decides he's going to marry Matilda off to Geoffrey of Anjou. So he is the son and heir of the Count of Anjou, Fulk. Anjou is on the southern sort of border of Normandy, so it provides a good political alliance for Normandy. It cuts off some of the support that Robert's nephew is trying to gather as well. So Henry thinks it's a good political move and a way that he can counteract the threat that he's feeling and also try to move forwards and get a grandson. One of the issues that he has is a year after this marriage, his nephew actually dies. So that threat all goes away. And the main reason that he chose this match has been completely nullified. But obviously Henry couldn't have foreseen that.
Right.
The other problem that he has is that Matilda has absolutely no desire to marry a mere count.
Right.
Who is almost 10 years younger than her. She
Good for her.
Well, at this point, she's about 26. He's about 15 or 16.
Ooh.
And so she goes over there and he's like, welcome to Anjou, Countess of Anjou. And she's like, how dare you call me that? I am Empress Matilda. And he's like, well, this doesn't seem fair. you're a count's wife now. You should call yourself Countess of Anjou. And she's like, absolutely not. You can get lost. She ends up actually, stropping off back home to Henry I's court and saying, this guy is not for me. I'm not staying there. And you get this weird situation.
She set the precedent for Mary Tudor after she was widowed from Louis XII. She remained Queen of France too. I love that. Anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. That was what I was saying earlier about don't call her anything but Empress because you will find yourself in trouble. She jealously guards that for the rest of her life, which kind of been great for 16-year-old Geoffrey. It's called Geoffrey le Bel, Geoffrey the Handsome. A very good-looking 16-year-old who might have thought, got myself an older woman here.
Good for me.
Yeah. And, I'm quite a catch. I'm the heir to a county in France. And she's like, ugh, please. I was married to an emperor. You are nothing.
As if.
Taking all the wind out of her sails. So she ends up, she strops off back to England and tells Henry she wants nothing to do with this stupid little boy. But this stupid little boy, writes to Henry and says, father-in-law, can I have my wife back, please? And Henry pretty much needs a grandson. So he's like, you know what, Matilda, you're going to have to go back. You're going to have to go back and make the best of this. And so eventually she does. And ultimately they end up having what seems like a fairly good relationship. Geoffrey's father, Fulk of Anjou, and abdicates his county to his son almost straight away as soon as they're married, and goes off to Jerusalem to become the king of Jerusalem. Marries Melisande, the heiress to the kingdom of Jerusalem, and sets himself up over there as a king. So in his teens, Geoffrey is Count of Anjou, married to an empress, if you please. And Henry must have thought that things were starting to look up for him when Matilda eventually has a son, not till 1133. So maybe the first 5 years of their marriage isn't all that great. But 1133, 5 years in, she has a son who is named Henry, probably for his grandfather, maybe for her first husband. That would be naughty, wouldn't it?
Ooh, scandal.
But most likely for his grandfather, for Henry I. And weirdly, then we get a situation where the relationship between Matilda and her dad begins to really break down, and her and Geoffrey seem to get really close. They seem to be getting on at this point. And there was a big argument about some castles on the Norman border that Henry had apparently promised to Geoffrey and Matilda as part of the wedding arrangements, but which he was refusing to hand over. So Geoffrey and Matilda had gone to kind of lay siege to these castles in 1135, and we're kind of on the brink of open war between father and daughter in 1135 when Henry passes away. So he has a 2-year-old grandson. You can't really give the crown to a 2-year-old. It's not going to work out well for anybody. And so Matilda is thinking, well, all of the nobles of England have sworn allegiance to me. Isn't that fantastic? I'll put my feet up for a little bit, because she's pregnant again by this point. So, no rushing around, no stress.
Mm-hmm.
Puts her feet up for a little bit on the borders of Normandy, and thinks I'll head into Normandy and I'll head across to England and gather my dues when I get there. But in the meantime, cousin Stephen, naughty old Stephen, who got off the white ship, who is on the north coast of France when he hears that his uncle has passed away. He's Henry's favourite nephew by all accounts. Hops in a ship and speeds across to England, not to pay his respects to his uncle, but to head into London and get himself crowned the new king of England. And this is where my sympathy for Stephen begins, really, because I kind of think this is exactly how Henry became king.
Right.
Stephen only does what Henry did. He gets much more hate than Henry does, largely because he does this to Empress Matilda rather than doing it to Robert Curthose, who nobody cares about. Yeah. Anyone listening care about Robert Curthose? No, I didn't think so. But because he does this to Matilda, Stephen gets a really bad press for it. But part of the thing with the succession at this point too that's worth pointing out is that there is an interregnum as soon as a king dies in England. There is no automatic succession for their son, their heir, or anything like that. Henry III changes that at the end of the 13th century. So the first king to automatically succeed their father is Edward I in 1272.
Oh.
So way back in 1135, that simply didn't happen. When a king dies, there is an interregnum. There is no king. There is no king's peace. And the reason that the country will always want a fast resolution to that is that there's no king's law. There are no courts sitting. It becomes like the purge. There's a free for all. It's every man for himself, and there is no kind of comeback for the crimes that you commit. Some people doubtlessly would enjoy that. Most of the establishment are thinking, how do we solve this as quickly as we possibly can? We've got Matilda in Normandy, who is pregnant, is not moving as far as we can tell, or at least is not moving quickly, making no effort to get here, really. She was pretty much at war with her dad when he died. So part of the story that Stephen will tell is that on his deathbed, Henry had changed his mind and wanted Stephen to succeed him. How true that is, nobody really knows. It's probably a lie. But it becomes believable because there is this conflict between Henry and Matilda. So when Stephen turns up, and I mean, we haven't even talked about the fact here as well that Matilda represents female rule, which...
Yeah.
Oh, no, we can't have that.
Right, exactly.
Say all the nobles of England. Definitely not me. I wouldn't say that at all. And so Stephen turns up and, we're told that London wants him to become king. The chronicles talk about the fact that London elects Stephen to be the new king of England. They want him to get himself crowned really quickly, to bring some stability, and also to do away with this weird idea of a woman ruling, because nobody in England in the 12th century seems to be able to compute what that might look like.
Yeah.
They can't understand it at all. So Stephen is crowned as the new King of England, a few weeks after his uncle passes away. And I think you can only imagine Matilda's joy when she hears about this. Isn't that lovely? Oh, good on cousin Stephen. That's great for him. We'll go back to Anjou and we'll put our feet up, and you can call me Countess from now on.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
I can't imagine her saying any of that. She was like, no way. Somebody hold my beer.
Exactly. We are heading to England.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how anybody could not be fascinated by this story. And it goes back to the fear of a woman ruling, or the fear of the unknown of a woman ruler.
Yeah, it's the uncertainty that represents in people's minds, because for medieval people, and it's very easy for us to just shout misogyny, and it definitely is misogyny. But if we put ourselves in their shoes a little bit, the entire purpose of a medieval ruler is to protect the kingdom, to lead troops into battle, to defend their people. Yes, you can make laws and government, and you can try and make the church happy and all that sort of stuff. But if it came down to one thing that you're supposed to do as a medieval ruler, it's defend your people militarily on a battlefield. In the medieval mind, women can't put on armour and lead an army and fight on a battlefield. It's not the done thing. So then if the kingdom is attacked and you have a female ruler, what do? That female ruler can't protect you, so they can't fulfil the primary responsibility of a ruler in the medieval mind. If a man leads an army for them, if it's their husband, isn't he just the king?
Right.
Matilda, when we get to Matilda's military effort, her military leader will be her half-brother, Robert, the Earl of Gloucester, who seems like a really fantastic man. But if he's leading the Queen's armies, isn't he just the king?
Yes.
It muddies the waters, and it confuses key issues in there. So absolutely, it's misogyny. It's the patriarchy at work. But I think you have to allow for a small degree of understanding what that meant to them, what crisis this kind of triggered in the minds of men. They couldn't understand how they would give fealty to a woman and expect her to lead them in battle when she can't do that. And if somebody else does it on her behalf, isn't he just the king? And what does it mean if we follow that man? It's kind of something that they just never managed to rationalize, and it's easier just to avoid the issue. So Stephen represents the avoidance of all of those questions that they don't want to have to answer, and they don't want to have to reconcile. All of the circles that they don't want to square can be got rid of if they just get Stephen crowned. And so Stephen turns up and they're like, fancy being king. He says, yes, please. Gets crowned. Job done.
Sign me
Puts
up.
his feet up in a palace and thinks, nice, king's life for me. I am on easy street.
If just one of those men had decided to don some armor on Empress Matilda, how different it would have been. They would have been like, here, we just had this fitted for you. Put this on and come with us,
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we don't see women in this period fighting either. Women will fight to defend their homes, particularly if men are away. There is an account of a lady called Petronella during this period putting on armour and taking part in a battle. She ends up falling in a river and some men have to save her, because of course they do, because men are writing chronicles. So of course you have to save the poor little lady who fell in the water.
The damsel in distress.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not that it's impossible. It's that it requires far more thought than just crowning a man. And so the easy way to avoid the problem is to just let Stephen be king.
Yeah, but that doesn't...
It's not even entirely clear whether Stephen turned up and was like, I want to be king, or whether Stephen got to London and they were like, please, help us out, do us a solid.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long did he last sitting on the throne before Matilda came back over and tried fighting for it?
One of the interesting things is that Stephen starts his reign really, really well. There is an invasion from Scotland and it's pushed back. He has initial success. Everybody likes him. The City of London absolutely love King Stephen, and all the way through what follows, the City of London remain absolutely loyal to Stephen because they adore him. There's something about him. Clearly, people who knew him found him, an attractive leader, a ruler who they wanted to follow. So the first 4 years, it goes pretty well. It all looks pretty rosy. But in 1139, Matilda is finally ready to move. She's no longer pregnant. She has not forgotten that she's meant to be Queen of England. And if Stephen thought she had, he was in for a rude awakening. So in the summer of 1139, she lands at Arundel Castle on the south coast. Now, the interesting thing is that the Earl of Arundel at this point is married to Henry I's widow. So Henry's second wife. So Matilda's stepmother is at Arundel Castle. So does she land there thinking, I'm going to get help from my stepmom?
Yeah.
Is she invited? There is some suggestion that she's invited over by her stepmom, who thinks that maybe she can reconcile Matilda and Stephen and prevent what is clearly about to happen. If she did not know Matilda very well. But she ends up at Arundel Castle. And one of the things that Stephen becomes really famous for, and it's actually something that Henry II, Matilda's son, will become really famous for. Throughout this period, Stephen develops this reputation for moving with lightning speed. So he turns up way before his enemies think he's going to be able to get there. He's clearly mastered moving his troops around really, really quickly. Empress Matilda gets inside Arundel Castle, and Stephen, suddenly turns up outside the walls and lays siege to Arundel Castle. And Robert of Gloucester, who is Empress Matilda's half-brother, his castle is based at Bristol. And at this time, he renounces his fealty to Stephen and declares for his half-sister, Empress Matilda, and says, he's going to help her to take the throne. So Stephen is in a little bit of trouble now. He's got kind of a war on two fronts because he's got Robert in Bristol, who is kicking off, and he's got Matilda down on the south coast, who is kicking off. And Stephen gets criticised an awful lot for what happens next. I'm going to tell you what happened, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't think he should get criticised for it. Mm-hmm. Matilda sends word to Stephen and says, can you just give me safe passage to go to Robert? And Stephen says, absolutely. And he provides her with an escort from Arundel Castle to Robert in Bristol. And then that's that. The chroniclers, ever since, have absolutely lambasted Stephen for doing this. Mm-hmm. No, they've said what a stupid mistake this was. I query that on a couple of fronts. Stephen at least now has a war on one front, not two. All of his enemies are in one place. He knows where they are. They're stuck in Bristol Castle. He must have been hoping they can't really do very much from there. But he's concentrated all of his problems in one place instead of having it spread out. Who knows where Matilda might have gone from Arundel.
True.
But the main issue for me is, what is the alternative to allowing Empress Matilda to leave? If she'd asked to be given safe passage, Stephen had said no. He had starved everyone inside that castle to death. Or he had pounded it into the ground with trebuchets and stones, and everyone inside had been killed. What do you think Stephen's reputation might have looked like then?
Not good.
That would be the most unchivalric thing that he could possibly have done. To kill an empress, kill his cousin, and kill a woman are three really bad things. To kill an empress who is your cousin and a woman is pretty bad.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Stephen took the lesser of two evils in that circumstance. I doubt he wanted to allow Matilda to go to Bristol, but faced with the alternative of her dying under a siege that he's leading, I think he probably thought this was the least bad option that he had in those circumstances. But the benefit of hindsight will tell us it was probably not a good idea in the long run.
That's always the thing, isn't it? We can look back and say, oh, that was dumb, but living in it is a totally different story.
Yeah, I think Stephen made a solid play on the basis that he can't attack a woman without losing honour. And if he lets Matilda go to Bristol, he's got all of his enemies in one place and he can focus on dealing with them there. And she'll be behind Robert's walls and he can focus on dealing with Robert's walls. And so we end up in this situation. So there is a third player involved in this too, and that's David, the King of Scotland. So David is an uncle of Empress Matilda. He is obviously completely outraged that Stephen has stolen the throne from his niece, but this ignores the fact that Stephen's wife is also his niece. What David is doing something very convenient for David. The outrage is completely fake. What David wants to do is invade the north of England. And so he does this. And the more Stephen is distracted by Matilda in Bristol, the more this helps David. And he, throughout this period, he pushes further and further south, to the point where he's trying to get his candidate installed as the Prince Bishop of Durham. He's ruling the north of England. And actually, the north of England seems pretty happy to be under Scots control at that point. They're really not bothered. They're not fighting back. But there is this kind of third wheel. There is this third element to what's going on in the period that we will call the Anarchy, so the civil war between Stephen and Matilda. Matilda is pretty quick to move herself from Bristol to Gloucester Castle. And part of the reason for that is that Gloucester Castle was a royal castle. It belonged to her dad. So it was a fitting place for a queen to be based. And she begins to hold court there. She begins to mint coins. She begins to issue laws. And we get this really tricky situation in which, Stephen has all of his regional earls who are spread out across the country. And so Matilda starts creating earls from amongst her followers that have the same earldom as Stephen's people.
Oh, no.
So you're putting them on a direct collision course. And Matilda is effectively saying, you can be the Earl of Worcester. All you got to do is go and kill the Earl of Worcester and it's yours. So, she is very deliberately picking fights all over the place.
Yeah.
And setting these men up against each other. You can have all of these lands and titles and prestige. All you got to do is kill the bloke who's already got it. And we settle into this. Most of what we call the Anarchy is really a period of it's Cold War. It's pretty boring. Nothing happens. England, I argue, in my book, I argue that the term anarchy is not the right phrase for this period in England, because England is at no, anarchy means that there is no government, there is no rule. During this period, England is divided into three. Stephen retains control of the southeast of London, and his authority stretches all the way up as far as York. York is still loyal to Stephen. Matilda controls the southwest, so from Bristol and Gloucester and the southern Welsh marches, and kind of you could add Devon and Cornwall and all those bits in as well. She controls all of that. She is issuing law. She is minting coins. She is appointing sheriffs and all of that kind of thing. And King David of Scotland is controlling the north of England. None of those places is ungoverned. And none of it feels ungoverned either. So I don't believe that there is actual anarchy during this period. I think it gets called that in part because there is this sense that, England had been joined together and was on the road to its destiny to become this huge empire in the 19th century, and that this is a moment where it all fractured and fell apart, and that's regressive, and we ought to call that by some disgusting name that nobody would like to hear. So it gets dubbed the Anarchy. Undoubtedly, chroniclers talk about it as being a fairly apocalyptic period too, but there are trouble with the chroniclers that we have. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle famously talks about this being 19 years in which Christ and his saints were asleep. That's being written at the end, so they know it's 19 years.
Yeah.
So it's being written afterwards. Under Matilda's son, Henry II, who wants to be celebrated for bringing an end to all of that civil strife and conflict, so it needs to look bad for him to look really good. And that version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is written at Peterborough. And Peterborough is on the front line of a whole lot of trouble that Stephen has with one of his nobles, the Earl of Norfolk, he doesn't seem to be on Stephen's side or Matilda's side. He's just doing his own thing. He's just out here starting fights and attacking towns when he feels like it. And so Peterborough is regularly attacked. And so it must have felt like it was pretty bad there. The other writers that we have for this period are based. So we have the Chronicle of William of Malmesbury. So Malmesbury is one of the places that is fought over most intensely for the whole 19 years. So William has a pretty warped view of what's happening. He extrapolates what's happening on his doorstep across the country. One of the other writer that we have, the Gesta Stephani, so the Deeds of Stephen, is written by someone who is believed to have been in the household of the Bishop of Bath. So again, he's in the southwest. He's on that frontier of Matilda's territory. He's seeing all of the fighting, and he's extrapolating that. So we get lines in chronicles that talk about the fact that a monk couldn't walk outside of the monastery door for fear of being beaten and robbed. The roads weren't safe to travel. Nobody went anywhere. Nobody did anything. That is demonstrably nonsense. From a monastic point of view, it's nonsense because during Stephen's reign, there are more monasteries founded than any other king's reign up to this point. And they're all being filled with monks who are happily travelling around the roads. There is an explosion in monastic life in England during the Anarchy. So they're all quite happy travelling to all of these monasteries and then getting there and writing, you couldn't possibly travel on the roads that I've just travelled on. You get beaten up just like I didn't. And we get, there is an effort in the 1140s. There is a group of southern peasantry, for want of a better word. There is no nobility involved in this, but they decide to head off on crusade. They go to Portugal on crusade. They clearly feel safe to leave their lands and their families at home during this period that we're told, everyone was tearing everybody apart and it was dire and horrible and everyone was scared. They all just get in a boat and, let's go and fight some Moors in southern Iberia. Let's go on holiday to southern Spain and start some fights, like British people do. So there is all of this evidence that really speaks against it being anarchic. I think we have a very specific view from very specific places that they extrapolate across the country, and some of the more empirical evidence that we have demonstrates that there really wasn't the sense that we get from the chronicles. So I think anarchy is not the best term for it, but nevertheless we do have, for a long time we have Matilda desperately pushing her claim to be the rightful Queen of England and ruling, a third of England, really.
Right.
I've talked about it as largely a Cold War, pretty boring and not much happens. There's only one pitched battle in the entirety of this period that we call the Anarchy. Just one. That doesn't sound very anarchic, does it?
No.
And that comes in 1141, so 2 years after Matilda's arrival. And obviously we're talking about Matilda, but she's not there because women aren't allowed to go and fight. So her half-brother Robert leads an army to Lincoln, where Stephen is laying siege to Lincoln Castle because another one of his nobles is being a bit of a nuisance. And this nobleman happens to be Robert of Gloucester's son-in-law.
Oh.
So he's being particularly unpleasant. He's not a very nice man. He's being unpleasant. Stephen turns up. The people of Lincoln ask Stephen to come and help them. Stephen turns up to help them, and Ralph, the Earl of Chester, sends word to his father-in-law saying, "Oh, come and help me. The king's coming to beat me up." And Robert clearly thinks this is a really good opportunity to fight Stephen. He turns up in Lincoln with a bigger army than Stephen's got. Lots of Stephen's noblemen are advising him not to fight. Pitched battles during this period are not the done thing. Nobody wants them. They're too unpredictable. They're generally to be avoided. But Stephen refuses to run away and ends up getting defeated. And we're told several of the sources talk about him fighting like a lion. He breaks his sword and has to borrow an axe from someone to carry on fighting. And eventually someone manages to throw a stone which hits him on the head, on his helmet, and sort of knocks him to the ground. And he's kind of disarmed. So this idea that Stephen is this pretty impressive warrior who is making a good impression of himself. But he's taken into custody. Robert treats him with the respect that a king deserves. He's well looked after. And he is taken back to Bristol Castle, where Empress Matilda meets him, and is really not very happy with Robert for being nice to Stephen.
That's not very queenly.
Well, no. Stephen is treated with respect until he gets in front of Matilda, and then she has him clapped in chains and thrown into a prison cell.
Whoa. You wouldn't have done that to her.
Well, he didn't. I mean, he let her go from Arundel Castle, and he might have been thinking a bit of payback. I was nice to you.
Yeah.
Can't you be nice to me once? But I think in her mind, he is not the rightful king. He has stolen what's hers. She can't treat him like a king without acknowledging that he's a king. So she has to treat him like he is not a king. So she locks him in a cell. Several of the chronicles at the time say, and that's where it was imagined that Stephen would end his days, as Matilda's prisoner in a cell. Matilda almost immediately realises the problems that she's facing. So she gets to Winchester, manages to take control of the treasury. The Bishop of Winchester is Stephen's brother. That's not very helpful. But he seems quite happy to swap sides and allow Matilda to get away with taking the royal treasury at Winchester. But she then has to negotiate to be allowed into London. London absolutely loves Stephen. They are not happy that Matilda has chucked him in a prison cell. And it takes her weeks and weeks and weeks to get permission from the capital to be allowed to enter. This does not put her in a strong position at all. She's not operating from a position of power and authority here. But she does get into London. There is, in the summer of 1141, there is lots of preparation around the idea that she's going to be crowned. So this is the only thing that will resolve this in her favour, make her a queen. She needs to undergo a coronation. And she begins to talk about herself using the title Lady of the English, which I think is directly appealing back to Ethelfled. Yes. That idea of Lady of the Mercians. It's something that the English should be able to identify with. Now, you had Ethelfled as Lady of the Mercians, and she was pretty flippin' impressive.
Yeah.
So I will be Lady of the English. That's how we'll get around this idea that I can't be a king because that's a man. I can't be a queen because a queen, by this point, has a very specific meaning. It's a king's wife who performs certain duties as a queen. It's not a queen regnant. That's not something that this period recognises, really. So she comes up with this title, Lady of the English. But you can still sense the unease in London because all the chronicles start to talk about this uppity woman who's not behaving very womanly. And they start saying, she's being pretty awful and we're not sure we like her. And to the point, so one of the criticisms that she gets in a chronicle, for example, and this instance in 1141 where she's in London and trying to get herself crowned is the entire root of people's bad opinions of Matilda. The idea that she is somehow a terrible, horrible woman is just from this few months of her life. So they complain in the chronicles that her uncle King David comes down from Scotland because he's coming to see his niece being crowned. Let's ignore the other niece who's been kicked off the throne. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And the chronicles complain that Matilda fails to stand up when her uncle David and her half-brother Robert walk in a room.
Oh, no.
Now, you would never expect a king to stand. A king of England would never stand for a king of Scotland. And a king of England would never stand for one of his earls. Why are you expecting Matilda to do that?
Because she's a woman.
Because she's a woman. Yeah. But I think all of these things become, and I think if we apply hindsight to what happens later on in Matilda's life, I think all of this is just looking for excuses again to avoid this idea of female rule, because they begin to cast her as this terrible woman. She's giving out orders. Can you imagine a ruler giving out orders? How are we ever going to cope with this?
Right.
She speaks with a harsh voice. I mean, these must be people who heard Henry I shouting his head off all over the place.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that you don't expect a ruler to be able to raise their voice when they want to be, well, they want to make it clear that they're annoyed or whatever. But we get all of these chronicles talking about how awful and dreadful and impossible to work with she is. They've never said that before, and they will say the exact opposite later. But in this moment, she's impossible to work with. We then get what amounts to a masterstroke by Stephen's wife, who annoyingly is also called Matilda. So we've got Empress Matilda trying to get herself crowned, and we have got Queen Matilda, who is Stephen's wife. Queen Matilda turns up in London and says to Empress Matilda, what if Stephen renounces the crown? You can have the crown. You set him free. We'll go back to Boulogne. She's the Countess of Boulogne. She's the heiress of Boulogne. We'll go back to Boulogne, and my son Eustace can just, be heir to the county of Boulogne, which is, entirely it's separate from the crown of England. It's just his mother's inheritance. That would be fine, wouldn't it? And Empress Matilda, I think this is the big mistake she makes. Empress Matilda says, absolutely not, and throws Queen Matilda out of her court. Queen Matilda has played an absolute blinder there, because she's asked Empress Matilda for something that is almost impossible for her to grant in freeing Stephen, and allowing an enemy to be back out on the streets. But what Queen Matilda has also asked for is her son's lawful and rightful inheritance from her, not from Stephen, from her. And when Matilda says no to that, you can see this all throughout history. Richard II makes the same mistake with John of Gaunt's lands when he dies. You start messing with the laws of inheritance, and anyone with anything to lose sits up and listens. And unfortunately for Matilda and any other ruler, all of those with anything to lose are your earls, your barons, your knights, the people that you really need on your side.
Yeah.
So when she denies the lawful rights of inheritance of Stephen's son Eustace, all of those people suddenly think, oh, that's a problem. Because what if she does that to me?
Exactly.
And I think Queen Matilda's played a blinder because she's wrapped this up perfectly to force Empress Matilda into this position. But I do think this is the mistake that Empress Matilda makes. Empress Matilda continues to prepare she kicks Queen Matilda out of London, continues to prepare for a coronation. Queen Matilda immediately, goes to all of the local nobility, and she's like, oh, I can't believe she's done that to me. That's a terrible thing. What if she did that to you guys? You must be really worried. If only there was something we could do, like maybe take an army into London and, get rid of her. And lo and behold, on the south bank of the Thames, an army appears. And we're told that this happens the evening before Empress Matilda's planned coronation.
Oh.
There are chronicles that talk about soldiers and people. The people of London also come out to join the army because they love Stephen. The chronicles talk about them, suddenly appearing in the streets of London like bees pouring out of a hive. Suddenly the streets are filled with people who hate Empress Matilda. And the sources talk about the fact that Empress Matilda is sitting down to a lovely feast to celebrate, the evening of a coronation. And that she is so taken by surprise by this that she is forced to jump up from the table and flee London, so that when the army get to where she was about to eat this feast, they're able to sit down and eat the still warm food that she's left behind. Thank you very much, Empress Matilda. Yummy, yummy, yummy. So Matilda has been driven out of London on the eve of her triumph. And it's a woman who has effectively done this to her.
Yeah.
So when you talk about women not having power in medieval England, Queen Matilda knew exactly what she was doing with her power. She's played Empress Matilda like an absolute fiddle here.
Yes, she did.
Empress Matilda retreats back to Winchester, which is still, an important, significant city. It still holds the royal treasury at this point. The Bishop of Winchester, Stephen's brother, Henry of Blois, kind of says, might not be on your side anymore, I'm afraid. Might quite like my brother to be king again now. And so Empress Matilda finds herself slightly trapped in Winchester. The army from London is beginning to pursue her. She's trying to lay siege to the bishop's palace and the castle in Winchester. But this other army is coming now, and she's in danger of being sandwiched between two hostile forces. So as this army approaches, they decide to retreat back to Bristol, effectively. And Matilda she's making her way out, and Robert stays behind to provide this kind of rear guard to allow her to escape. And Robert ends up being caught in this process too. And we then get, for the rest of 1141, we get this kind of negotiation going on for a prisoner exchange between the two sides. So they want to get Stephen freed in return for Robert. Empress Matilda knows she's really going to struggle without Robert. She has leaned on him hard. He has been utterly loyal to her. There are reports that people sort of wanted him to become king when all of this kicked off, and he was like, absolutely not. It's Matilda or nobody. I'm 100% on her side. And he never wavered from that. He has been her military arm. It's him that's been leading her forces. It's him that led that army to Lincoln that captured Stephen. I think she feels really exposed without him. We should probably mention that Empress Matilda's husband, Geoffrey, is as good as useless in this story.
That's why we haven't heard about him, right?
No, he doesn't come over to England. He has absolutely no interest in England. He's busy actually trying to conquer Normandy. So the only benefit of what's going on in England for him is that he's conquering Normandy while England is distracted. He couldn't care less. So Robert has been doing all of those things for his sister that she kind of needs a man to do for her. And Stephen, when Stephen gets wind of this, he thinks it's great. He's going to get himself released in return for Robert. But we're also told that Robert, when he gets wind of this, absolutely refuses to accept it. He's telling Matilda, you can't allow an earl to be swapped for a king. That doesn't, there's no parity there. That's not fair. You can't do that. But I think Matilda feels so lost without Robert and uncertain how she might continue without Robert that she agrees to allow Stephen to go free if Robert is set free too. So in December 1141, the Battle of Lincoln's in February. By December, Stephen is released, back with a crown on his head. Robert is released, back with Empress Matilda. They're back in the southwest. And kind of the board is reset to where it was at the start of 1141. Absolutely nothing has changed. except that I think this episode demonstrates to Matilda the real problem that she's going to have in making herself the actual ruler of England. I think this is when it's driven home to her that she's not going to be able to do that. Not because of her own inabilities or incompetencies, but the attitudes of the men in London and in England mean that it is simply going to be impossible. They're going to find an excuse not to ever accept her as their ruler.
So is that when her mindset shifts to putting her son up as heir instead?
I think it is. So kind of over the years that follow, the Cold War sort of persists. Her son Henry is getting older, as kids do, they keep getting older.
Weird.
Throughout all of this. And she really does switch her mind to kind of protecting Henry's inheritance, positioning him as his grandfather's heir, which might have been what Henry I had planned all along, and just keeping that flame burning for him until he's ready to come and take it. Henry, I love Henry II. He's hilarious. He invades England at 14 with a bunch of his mates without his mum's permission or anything. It all goes horribly, horribly wrong. And he goes to ask his mum for some money to pay his knights, and she's like, absolutely not. On the naughty step with you. I didn't say you could do this. You're not having any money. Sort your own problems out. He goes to his uncle Robert of Gloucester and says, Mum won't pay my knights. Can you lend me some money to pay my knights? And Robert's like, oh, your mum says I can't. Sorry, I'm not getting involved. You can't have any money from me. And Henry ends up going to Stephen, the man whose kingdom he's just invaded, and says, can I borrow some money to pay my knights, please? And again, Stephen gives him the money and gets torn apart by chroniclers ever since for it. What kind of stupid idiot pays his enemy?
Right. Yeah.
But the upside for Stephen is both that Henry has left England. It wasn't quite an invading army, but this threatening force has been bought off and gone home. Henry looks like a bit of a joke. His cause has been severely damaged by the fact that he's botched this so badly. And Stephen looks like such a nice guy. What a magnanimous guy. He's helping Henry to maintain his honour. And I've actually suggested that I think when we get to the crunch between Henry and Stephen, they never actually confront each other in battle. They're provided with several opportunities when their armies are opposite each other, and they're always like, oh, do you know what? The weather's too bad. There's a bit of a stream in the way. I'm not sure we can really fight today. And I can't help wondering how much of that goes back to this sense that Henry kind of respected Stephen, and like everybody else, liked Stephen and didn't particularly want to kill him. I guess he wants to be king of England, but he can't ever bring himself to actually fight Stephen and kill him. And so Matilda ends up going back to Normandy, which Geoffrey has conquered by this point. He hands over the Duchy of Normandy almost straight away to their son Henry. So the first title that Henry holds is Duke of Normandy. And Henry continues to prepare to invade England all of the time. Every time he tries to do it, something goes wrong. His dad dies the first time. The second time, Eleanor of Aquitaine writes him a letter and says, "Do you fancy getting married?" And he's like, "Yes, I do." And speeds south to marry her and get Aquitaine, and misses another chance to invade. Eventually he does invade, tears around England a little bit, ends up coming to an arrangement with Stephen by which so Stephen's son Eustace, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, doesn't like the fact that his dad won't fight Henry and kill him.
Yeah.
Like Henry won't fight Stephen and kill him. And Eustace is clearly like, it's my inheritance, Dad. Eustace gets so outraged that he strops off to the east of England and ends up dying unexpectedly. Stephen does have another son named William, and really interestingly, everyone goes to William and says, "So you're your father's heir now?" And William says, "I am absolutely not. I do not want any of this." He's married to a fairly rich heiress. He's got lots of land and money of his own. And he's like, do you know what? Do you know what I don't need? I don't need all that stress.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm going to live my nice quiet life over here. I don't ever want to be king. So this clears the space. And what happens in the end is effectively Stephen adopts Henry as his son and appoints him as his heir. And kind of less than a year after this agreement is reached, Stephen passes away. After 19 years as king, 19 years of almost solid civil war, but the man dies with the crown on his head. He is never deposed. And Henry succeeds Stephen peacefully as the next king of England. And Matilda's life after that is really one in which she gets back into being utterly respected and loved by people and respected as a great governor and ruler, because now she's doing it on behalf of her son. She's doing things on behalf of a man, which everyone can understand.
Yeah.
She will spend the rest of her life kind of ruling Normandy on Henry's behalf. And she develops a really, really good reputation there. Normandy adores her. She is dispensing law. She is sitting in judgment in courts and things like that. She is absolutely respected. Nobody says she's a terrible, terrible woman that we can't work with. Nobody says she speaks in a harsh voice all the time and we don't like it. Nobody says she doesn't stand up when the right people walk in the room. Absolutely none of that. Now she's ruling on behalf of her son. Brilliant.
Yeah.
We love that and we can live with that. Oh, it's rotten. It's rotten.
It is. It's too bad. But I have to say, I love how you always come to history with a fresh perspective, because you made me look at Stephen in a different light, because I really didn't like him before. But
Yeah.
you definitely made him more human to me.
I think a lot of the decisions that he makes, you are criticizing him for being too nice. You're criticizing him for not murdering a woman.
Yeah.
You're criticizing him for not killing a 14-year-old child in his kingdom. All of those kinds of things. And put in that position, what would you do?
Yeah, exactly.
You would probably make the same decisions that Stephen made. And we have the benefit of hindsight in which we can say we think those were the wrong decisions, perhaps, from a strictly military point of view. But if you don't think he should have let Matilda out of Arundel to go to Bristol, then you think he should have murdered Matilda? Because that's the only other outcome available there.
Right.
So he makes that decision and we criticize him for it.
That's true. That's true. This was all supposed to be Matilda was a badass, and now I feel like I'm all like, oh, Stephen wasn't so bad. What a nice guy.
Stephen's fine. Matilda is absolutely a badass. I mean, let's not deny that. Queen Matilda is a badass as well.
Yes.
Stephen's wife knows exactly what she is doing. She is one of the most impressive people of the Anarchy that we don't talk about enough and that too few people know. She is the reason that her husband stays king in 1141, almost single-handedly. So there are two incredibly impressive Matildas at work in England at this point. One of the saddest things about Matilda, so she dies in 1167 at the age of 65. I mean, she's lived an incredible life. She's been an empress in Germany. She's, from the age of 16, she's ruled bits of Italy. She's helped her husband in Germany. She's been heir to the crown of England. She's lost her brother and ship disaster. She's been married to a younger man who she despised. Then they've become really, really close and fallen out with her dad together, only for a cousin to pinch the throne that she thought was hers. And she did not give up. She went and spent, 15 years. Stephen is king for 19 years. First 4 are pretty peaceful. So 15 years, she is fighting almost tooth and nail to become queen, fighting against the system that won't have her as ruler. Then she goes back to Normandy and is perfectly willing to help her son out by, she could have said, stuff you lot. You've all said I can't do this. Forget you. I'm going to go put my feet up and I'm going to retire, and you can just deal with it all yourself. All you men can just deal with it yourself. But she doesn't do that. She goes and looks after Normandy. And so when she dies at the age of 65, one of the saddest things I think about Matilda is if you go and find her memorial in Rouen Cathedral, it's on the wall. It's normally hidden behind a bunch of chairs, really hard to find, really hard to see. And her memorial, I mean, it says it's for her, but it describes her as the daughter of Henry, the wife of Henry, and the mother of Henry. Clearly someone thinks they're clever, but she is literally for all of eternity described only by the men in her life, despite all of the things that she has achieved in her own right, all of the things that she has done, the incredible life that she lived. Somehow someone carved in stone there. Oh, isn't it funny? She was a daughter of Henry, the wife of Henry, and the mum of Henry. No, she was Empress Matilda.
That's right. She was. She was the granddaughter of William the Conqueror. That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. She would have been very well aware of her heritage and her lineage, and she knew who she was.
Yeah, and the fact that she ends up back in Normandy, like that, it's just poetic.
Yeah,
Matt, I really enjoyed this. I know this was kind of long, but it's such a great story that there was no way I was going to cut you short on this.
Yeah, sorry. I have a tendency to go on about these things because they're all so interesting. And
yeah, but it's those details that you include. I think that's why I enjoy listening to you so much, is that you, like I said, you come to things with a fresh perspective. You include details that we don't always hear, and you include humor, which makes it so much easier to absorb history too. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking about Matilda with us.
No, it's a pleasure. Sorry for going on so long.
Thanks for listening to Tudors, Dynasty, and Beyond. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you never miss a new release. And if you loved it, leave a quick review. It helps more history lovers find the show. Want to support the podcast and get bonus content? Head to patreon.com/tudorsdynasty. You can also find the link in the show notes of this episode. Join the conversation with Rebecca on social media at Tudors Dynasty. Until next time.